Good afternoon and welcome to Tana Eastbourne. I'm David Dimbleby. I chair the trustees here, and it's a great pleasure to have you here, and it's a very proud week for us because we just won Museum of the Year award, so we're very excited by that. We're here to talk about the role of the arts and culture in the debate on the environment. We've got a big collection of pictures here. It's been over nearly 100 years. Got 5,000 pictures or so: Revilius, Borden, John Nash, William Nicholson. You can name them, you know the kind of people I'm talking about. And we have a big collection of Sussex painters, and it allows us to look at the way the region of Sussex, the Downs and all the rest, have been reflected in our pictures. But what we want to talk about this afternoon is the way this is changing. Our own view of the environment is changing. We have exhibitions about, we have one about, for instance, the border between Syria and Israel. We have politics coming in. We have environmental issues coming into our pictures. So it's not just about beautiful pictures of the South Downs. It's about what role the view we take and our artists take of nature and the rest of it affects the environment. Now, there are four of us here, including me. Jenny Waldman, on my right, is director of the Art Fund, and that's the fund that actually gave us, that's not why she's here, gave us the award as Museum of the Year. She's was previously, she directed the 1418 Now, the official program for the First World War centenary, and she's done all sorts of things. She was creative director of the London 2012 Festival, the end of the Cultural Olympiad. She's been a consultant to Somerset House, I think I'm right in saying, and she's commissioned events at Tate Modern and Tate Britain. That's roughly right, isn't it? And on my left here, familiar figure of Caroline Lucas, the MP, of course, for the Green Party, the first and only Green Party member in the House of Commons representing Brighton Pavilion. She was an MEP before. She chairs the all-party parliamentary group on climate change. She's on the Environmental Audit Committee. She wins awards all the time for her work on social exclusion, on wildlife protection, on women's rights. And she is one of the top 100 eco-heroes of all time in the environment, from the Environment Agency, correct? That's right, isn't it? Yes. And anyway, she's here not because of all that, but also because she's a great friend of Tana. We had an exhibition that she curated called Brink, which she'll be talking about, which was all gathered from, largely from our collection, and was done with the help of the person on her left, Sara Cooper, who is our resident head of collections and exhibitions. She overlooks the exhibitions that are put on. She works with visiting guest curators like Caroline Lucas. She looks after the pictures, and she looks after our acquisitions. She's curated some of our biggest exhibitions, Revilius and Peggy Angus and John Virtue, and actually at the moment is engaged on curating with Andy Friend, the writer, our first exhibition, I think, in over 50 years of the work of John Nash, Paul Nash's brother, which is going to be a stupendous exhibition here at Tana. So that's who we are, and welcome again, and we'll start straight away, I think, by asking, maybe you, Sara, could start. We've got a lot of landscape paintings here. Does that fit into some sort of theory about the environment, or is it just pictures that you like and we like and the public like?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, as you said in your introduction, the collection of almost 5,000 works is largely a landscape collection. That is absolutely its key strength. It started with the Pictures of Sussex collecting policy, and it's built up over the years along those lines, really. And I think what that gives us is a really good, strong platform for being an organisation that has discussions and debates like this, and puts on exhibitions like Brink and working with David Nash. It brings it all in together, using the collection as that kind of catalyst for those conversations. So I think, you know, they are beautiful pictures of lovely landscapes. You know, we live in an amazing location here in Eastbourne, between the kind of the Downs and the coast, and lots of our artists have represented that in their work. So I think they are that, beautiful pictures, but I think also we need to look at our artists as witnesses, as recorders of a time. you know, at the landscape at a particular moment. And I think we are sitting on a collection here that can tell all kinds of stories about our environment.
But those are historic stories. I mean, looking ahead, obviously the environment is now, we know, hugely challenged by climate change, by developments of all sorts. How would you see the work we've got here helping that discussion about how the world, how the world should be?
Well, I think
in the next 100 years. What good does it do to look at the pictures of the South Downs?
I mean, I think to know what you're losing and what's changing, you need to know what was there before, what you had. And I think what a collection gives you, what the artists at the time, they're recording what was there, albeit occasionally with artistic license, but, you know, largely they were recording the wildlife, the species, the flora, the fauna that existed at that moment. And if we've lost that, then we can see perhaps through art what our contemporary artists are perhaps recording.
I get that. So Caroline Lucas, you curated with Sara our wonderful Brink exhibition, all taken from the gallery, yes. Yeah. What was the idea behind that? What were you trying to say, if you were trying to say something other than these pictures I like?
Well, I knew that I wanted to do something around the environment and nature. That's what gets me up in the morning. That's what worries me in terms of what we're doing to the environment and nature, and how do we try to get that conversation more widely held. But the inspiration for trying to identify which paintings and sculptures and so forth to choose really came from the David Nash exhibition that was happening simultaneously. So in other parts of the gallery, there was the amazing David Nash, huge wooden sculptures going on, and his exhibition was called 200 Seasons. It was a retrospective looking back 50 years of his life. And so that kind of temporal perspective, that idea of time and nature changing over time, was what set me off on my thoughts, thinking, you know, David is looking back 50 years. What would happen if we tried to imagine some of these very familiar paintings and scenes? What would those areas look like in another 200 seasons? Can we even ask that question with any degree of certainty? And it was that feeling of, you know, being pretty disconcerted, frankly, of thinking that with the accelerating climate crisis, with the fact that we're now in the 6th mass extinction, we have no certainty at all about whether this landscape is going to look anything like the same as it does now in 50 years' time. Will it even be here? Will it be inundated? Will the erosion be much worse? Will the species that we've got used to have just gone? And so it was that sense of insecurity that fed into the name of the exhibition, Brink, that sense of being on the brink, but also hopefully creating a space where people could sort of think about some of those questions.
But it was kind of historical in the sense that it was looking back. This is how it is now in 2020. You didn't have anything that looked forward. You didn't have any sort of dystopian visions of the future in your exhibition. I
didn't have any dystopian visions of the future. There are plenty of those elsewhere. In a sense, what I think I wanted to do was to partly celebrate the beauty of nature, because one of my real concerns is that people will only protect what they love, and they're only going to love what they feel that they know, and that sense of knowing and loving and protecting seems to me to be connected. And because we know that people spend less time now in nature than they did in the past, certainly children do, I think there's a very real concern that the less familiar we feel with our natural surroundings, the less likely we are to be on the front line of protecting them. So that was a sense that by celebrating beautiful works, that isn't just a sort of a trivial thing to do. It is actually quite a political thing to do with a small p, in the sense that grounds us into knowing what we want to love and protect.
Just before we come to Jenny, just tell us about David Nash, for people who didn't see that exhibition, and why that was such a powerful influence on you.
So the David Nash exhibition made this whole space full of the most extraordinary wooden sculptures, huge, monumental. His love of trees, he is immersed in the life of trees from years back. Some of his sculptures, obviously, that couldn't be here, are literally live sculptures. So Ash Dome is an area in Wales that he's planted with ash trees and got them to bend in a certain way to become this extraordinary living dome. What we had here was a sense of what really felt essential in a way that the wood and the shapes seemed almost elemental in some way. I can't quite describe it, but they were awe-inspiring. I'm not surprised that this is one of the most popular exhibitions the town has ever done, because just the size of it, the beauty of it, the smell of it, the texture of it. You know, wood is very alive, and it was something that was, you know, a really immersive experience in the beauty of trees and the way in which they are so important in terms of our spiritual well-being, if I can put it that way, but also, as we learn more, they're absolutely essential in our physical well-being in terms of keeping the oxygen circulating in the atmosphere too.
I remember that amazing film he'd made too, of this log.
Yes.
Do you remember that? Did you see? He made a film of a log that he actually told me how he got it up in the mountain, in the hills somewhere in Wales, and rolled it down. And for 8 years they kept tracking where it had gone.
Yeah.
And then there was a wonderful moment when it got stuck, and they had to move it because it was blocking the thing. And then they didn't want it to go on that farmer's land because that farmer's land wasn't interested, but this land was, and so they moved it to the right. And then it appears. And in the end, I've watched people watching that film about this log, actually in tears, because at the end it looks like an animate, looks like a seal going through the water in the estuary. Absolutely beautiful. So Jenny, first of all, a big welcome. Thank you for our award as Museum of the Year. We're really excited by that. We didn't bribe you by coming.
Not at all.
Just what's your experience, and it's very wide, of this business of the relationship of art and culture and artists to the natural world and to the environment and its future?
Gosh, well, Art Fund works with about 770 museum and gallery partners right across the UK, and we have certainly seen an increase in both awareness and kind of determination to increase the kind of ecological power, I suppose, of both of collections and exhibitions, but also reducing the climate footprint, the carbon footprint of museums, sort of right across the board, from large to small. So the exhibition Brink that Caroline and Sara were responsible for here was a brilliant example of that, and there are others across the UK in museums and galleries, just looking at artists who are interested in environment and in climate, and as you say, looking forward as well as looking back. I think not just dystopian, but also thinking about a potential future that is optimistic as well, so that artists can help us think about what we can do.
Where do you find the optimism?
Well, I suppose I think artists have an ability to help us make a sort of an assessment of where we are in the world and what our position is and what our ability is to make changes. So I think when any of us see a Wolfgang Tillmans that in this collection, or an Oliver Eliasson exhibition or piece, we are both thinking about the brink and the possibilities that things might be terrible, but also thinking about the possibilities that we can do something about and that we can change. And I think artists always have that ability to help us be inspired and be transformational.
But I can see I see what you're saying, and Caroline, what you were saying about, show us what's there now, show us the beauty and excitement of the landscape, and as it's been in Sussex in our case over 500 years. Do you also include in that poverty, unemployment, bad housing, all the other social issues? Are those things that are touched by art and culture in as direct a way as you were saying the natural environment is?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah. Why not?
I'm sure it can be. This exhibition wasn't trying to cover all of those things too, but I think to the extent that art creates a space where we can really challenge our imaginations, then no matter what issue you came up with, housing or inequality or anything else, it's a space, isn't it, where you can reflect in a kind of safe way and think about how things are and how things could be different. I mean, with the Brink exhibition, we did it very explicitly in a way by having the interactive wall at the back of the exhibition, where people, in a sense, they were bringing forward their ideas about how things should be in the future. We were inviting them to think about the threats to our environment and what pledges they made for themselves personally and what they wanted their policymakers to do on their own behalf. So sometimes you can do it in a very tangible, explicit way. And I think in other ways you just do it by shocking people, as some artists would do, or by providing information in a sense, not through data, but just through your sensory experience. And in that way can bring about change as well.
So the Brink exhibition, which is a perfect example of this, had what you call a small p political message. Sara, what was the response? Did you? I mean, you talked about the wall with notes on it. What did you actually? How would you? What kind of response was there? How did you measure the response to Brink?
It was. I mean.
What were people saying on that wall?
Yeah, no. Largely, I mean, as the audience coming into the show, seeing the works, they loved it as a show. Just to see those pictures together, but the kind of the messages and what we hoped people would sort of respond to and to feel about it was also, they were really engaged with it largely, and we, as Caroline said, we asked people to respond to as few kind of questions that we posed on this wall, and they responded on the cards, and we stuck them
What were the
up.
questions?
So it was about kind of, what do you see as being some of the issues? Because we talked a lot about, it's not our place to tell people what those issues are and to bang them over the head with, what are your answers to this? It was like lots of what we do at Towner, it was about being a place for the conversation, I suppose. So we raised the questions of, what do you think are some of the issues? What are you recognising as the problems we're facing? What can we all do collectively to make a difference or to change?
And what kind of answers were you getting?
So I mean, they were very, some people were very kind of, explicit. They were sort of writing the slogans, the kind of, there is no planet B, and the sort of give up plastic, become vegan. So there was lots of those explicit messages, but there were some that were far, they were thought through. They were talking about their responses to the paintings and recognising that, things were changing. And also, calling out Towner, as we would expect, on how do we do things here. And what we are going to do with those is collate them all into what we're calling the Brink Manifesto.
It's the Green Party manifesto for the next election.
No, exactly. And we want to just bring some of those kind of responses together, sort of a pledge from Towner about, how we can be part of it.
Of course, the interesting thing is, Jenny, we're talking here about paintings that were done in the past. I mean, they were all well, the fact they're there. I don't know who your most modern painter was in your Brink exhibition.
Well, there was a David Nash in it, so that wasn't, there was a David Nash sculpture in it.
Yes,
which
there was a David Nash
very much
sculpture.
some contemporary.
But you meet a lot of artists, that's your job. The Art Fund supports galleries everywhere. Do you find that the idea that the artists have an idea, like Caroline's been explaining, of wanting to get a particular message across, often on things like the environment, or do they paint from a sort of instinct and then maybe it has an effect? In other words, are they small p, more political than they used to be? Perhaps they've always been.
I think there's a full range of artists and what they want to achieve, but I think that what artists are uniquely really able to do is open up questions, and I think that one of the great things about going to an exhibition is that it tends not to tell you what to think. It just tends to open up a question and get you thinking in lots of different ways. And I love what Caroline and Sara did with Brink in the interactive board of getting people to write their own thoughts, because it is the beginning of a conversation. And I think we're all learning about climate change and about the environment afresh on a very regular basis as more information comes through. And that can be scientific information, it can be some discovery in the Antarctic about some sort of, huge tunnel or whatever. All of those things are fascinating. What art can do is give you the breathing space to really think and reflect and go deeper in your own thinking about the environment or about whatever the issue is, and about no issue at all, just about who we are and why we're here and what life is for. And goodness, at this particular moment when we're all wondering whether or not we can even meet friends for a drink in the evening, those deeper questions are coming to the fore. So I think that artists have a really important place, but I think that very few of them would say that they are large P political animals, or at least they separate their politics from their art, because art is about something that is not just more abstract, but also actually more profound than a slogan.
But I wonder how, I'm thinking back to a sort of Victorian painting of the Industrial Revolution, those great paintings of furnaces, fire at night, whole cities with smoke and everything. And did it have any effect on people's consciousness?
I think they were observational, and we're using those observations now to think that is that is what was happening, and then the sort of the small take.
But what you could say, I'm not an expert on art, and I do feel a bit of an imposter here. But the bit I know better is around literature, and you only need to look at Charles Dickens's novels of the pollution and the inequality, and many people would say that those novels, Hard Times, for example, or any of them really, had a big impact on things like, how quickly London cleaned up its sewage, for example. So I do think that art can make those changes, and not necessarily that Dickens sat down to think, how am I going to make London cleaner? I know, I'll write a novel. Obviously not. But nonetheless, to the extent that it changes what's acceptable, what changes a sort of a common understanding and perception of something, I think that is about change. And to me, where the gallery is concerned, it's almost about trying to reach people in a different place. So as a politician, I'm always banging people over the head about policies. But I've realised and recognised there is a limit to that, and it hasn't, frankly, on the environment, worked anywhere near fast enough. And there's a real school of thought saying that if we could just be with some of these big problems, if we could feel them on an emotional level, we might just be better at changing behaviour than if we type out an even more, tightly typed leaflet and hand that out to someone. That doesn't change people's behaviours.
So you should stop making speeches and pick up the paintbrush.
That's the plan.
I think that's true. I think Caroline's right. Art and culture goes to a different place in people than science and politics does. And I think they're complementary. I think we need the facts, but also we need to feel, don't we? And is that not what art does for us? It makes us feel passionately about something. And that's really, I think, critical to this kind of whole debate.
But Sarah, from Tana's point of view then, are we limited, because of our huge collection of landscape, to just talking about landscape and, by implication, climate change, and not talking about other issues that come up, about the things I was mentioning before, about,
of course,
social problems, poverty, and all that. I mean, Eastbourne Eastbourne has its social problems. You wouldn't find them reflected in the Turner exhibitions, would you?
Well,
because we're on a different strand.
I mean, I think there's certainly an element of using your strengths to be involved in the conversations that make sense for us to be having. So yes, I would say that we try and do what we can do best. There are other places that can do that, but equally the collection spans a whole range of subject matter, and also, as we were saying, the issues about the environment tie into a whole other host of issues that we can use it as a springboard. I mean, the connection to the landscape and access to green spaces and poverty and inequality, they're all so tied together, and who has access to nature, and they're so entwined. I think it can go off we can use our collection to go off in many different directions.
And Jenny, you talked at the beginning about the practical things that museums and art galleries can do. I mean, all art galleries are, I don't know whether they all are still, but I mean they have particular problems of climate control, of heating. The pictures have got to be, I mean, you curate these 5,000 pictures, the temperature's got to be exactly right. They are big users, aren't they, of energy on the whole, the galleries. What steps are people taking? Because it's all very well for us to sit here talking about how, you know, that wonderful exhibition, but if in fact it's contributing to the carbon footprint of Eastbourne, huge amounts of you know, exhaust fumes or whatever it is we contribute.
Well, I think that's it's a very important point. Yes, absolutely. So I think the Museums Association has a sort of climate emergency statement where they're asking museums to look both at their collections and exhibitions and public engagement, but also back of house, as it were, sort your own museum out as well. Otherwise, it would be rather hypocritical. So I think that more and more museums are looking at how they can change their own procedures in many, many ways. I mean, one of your co-winners of Museum of the Year, Science Museum, I think was the first of the national museums to put up solar panels in, I don't know, 2005 or quite a long time ago. And they've reduced their carbon footprint by about 25%, even though they've increased their exhibition space. So that is replicated amongst a number of museums and galleries across the scale of operation. The museum that I used to work in, the Imperial War Museum, had huge amounts of work going on sort of back of house about how they could reduce their carbon footprint. Tate looked at and many other museums and galleries, just how many curators are flying around the world to look at, I mean, you know, the number of different curators who go to the Venice Biennial and, you know, arrive by plane. This is crazy. You know, you don't have to go in such number. You don't have to go by plane. You can get by train anywhere in Europe. So all of those things, what individuals do, what the organisation does, how the building is operated, changing the light bulbs so that they're on, you know, LED long form lighting, all of those are making those incremental differences to reduce the climate impact of the museum at the same time as the sort of community engagement and also the exhibitions. So I think that there are a lot of different ways that museums can inspire the next generation as well as can sort out their own.
So I mean,
house.
They should be very upfront about this. It should be part of on the escutcheon of a museum, not just that we, for instance, have got 5,000 wonderful landscape painters, but we've cut our carbon emissions by so much, and I mean, is that they should set an example of in a practical way as well as by what
Well,
they
I think
show.
that, you know, we can all do our bit as individuals, as voters, as institutions, in the way that we approach our own lives, but also in the way that we approach our work. So yes, I mean, as museums, they are responsible organisations and need to think about how to be as responsible as possible at the same time as doing what they're meant to be doing, which is caring for collections. And of course you have to have atmospheric controls and climate controls for the works of art. So there are some constraints on what you do. You can't just throw the windows open and cut out the air conditioning, because that would be bad for the artwork, but you can really think quite carefully about what you're doing in all sorts of ways. And you know, reducing the number of electric kettles is a minor thing, but why not do it?
I can't leave the Imperial War Museum thought, actually, because we've been talking here about landscape and the effect that landscape has, and Caroline said it's political with a small p. Does the Imperial War Museum have a political with a small p message coming from its art?
I don't think they would consider themselves to be political at all, but I think that what they are doing, and I don't speak for the Imperial War Museum at all, but I am a relatively recent admirer of the Imperial War Museum. I think, as their director Dylees once said, they have in their name 3 of the most contentious words in the English language, and they're really kind of going with it. And what they're doing is they're responding to the current conversation through their exhibition program and through their engagement program. So they are looking at things like refugees as a result of war. They're looking at kind of landscape devastation as the result of war in various parts of the world now, as well as in the past through their collection. So I think each museum, as they look at what they've got, whether that's an engineering museum or a trains museum or a science museum or an art museum, are thinking about what it is about their collection that is of relevance to their communities. And I think one of the other things that is so interesting now about the way that museums are thinking about the future given COVID is that in future, international blockbuster exhibitions or international loans of artworks are going to be more expensive and more difficult and probably rarer. And that gives us a huge opportunity actually to share our local collections and our national collections within institutions like Towner and many others. So one of the things that Art Fund is doing is funding a pilot of museums and galleries that are establishing a network where they're actually sharing curated exhibitions from their own collections with each other. So moving an exhibition of a collection, say from Towner to Birmingham and from Birmingham to Nottingham, because people in those places would love to see Rebellious or whatever it is that you might choose to curate, and likewise your communities here might be really interested in what Aberdeen, another of your co-Museum of the Year colleagues, but has to offer, because those collections that we have all around the country are astonishing. They are absolutely brilliant, and there isn't nearly as much sharing as there could be.
But it's expensive.
Well, it's
the reason, isn't that right? I mean, one of the reasons we do. I mean, we had the what was the exhibition we had with the Wakefield Gallery? There was Nash, was there?
No, that was the Hockney and Davy.
Hockney Davy,
Alan
that's
Davy,
right.
yeah.
Hockney Davy just ended. I should know. But Hockney Davy was, it came down here now, and I've been here occasionally when pictures are arriving from places. I mean, it's unbelievable. You get a picture from the Tate, was it? I think the other day we had, a great van comes with two curators, one's not enough, and they have to stay overnight. And they have to pay, and they have these vast packages and things. So it's a wonderful idea. I mean, I would love our exhibitions. I'd love Brink to have gone travelling, because it's a great exhibition. I would love our John Nash exhibition in May to go travelling. I think it's going to one place.
It's going to Compton Verney, yeah.
But it would be wonderful. Yeah. It's going to where?
Compton Verney.
Compton Verney, that's right.
Yeah.
But it could go. I mean, it could actually go, to 10 galleries, if it were, if it was possible to do that.
Well, we're hoping to be able to fund more of that sort of thing, because I think you're right, it's expensive, but it's not as expensive as flying a work from San Francisco.
But we have an international exhibition going on upstairs with a prize, Towner International, and that's a good thing, because pictures come in from the Middle East, from the Far East, from America.
It's a very important thing.
Artists
of course, artists need to communicate, and and audiences and visitors in the UK need to see international work. But maybe once it's here, it could go other places in Britain, so that other people can see it, but also so that it makes sense of that international travel, and the local part of that travel is made more of. So I think there are lots of different ways that we can help. I mean, our Western Loan Programme also helps regional museums and galleries take works on loan from the national collections. I think there will be more and more of that in future.
Okay. Sarah, I'll come to you about what we do and how we do it. But Caroline, you obviously have been a warrior. I said you were, what did I describe you? About 100, one of the top 100 eco-heroes. So you've been on this for a long time now, about worrying about environment things. Apart from Brink, your exhibition which you curated, have you seen ways in which art and culture are leading people to understand what it is that you're on about?
The area that I know best, to be honest, is more around literature and some of the sort of literary festivals and so forth. And one of the things that I was doing shortly after Towner, partly because I enjoyed doing this so much, I was asked to curate a sort of a stream within the Cambridge Literary Festival. Sadly, COVID intervened, and a lot of it then just had to go online, and a lot of it didn't happen. But again, you get the sense that people want to see how they can look at both new texts or existing texts through a different lens, and therefore raise different questions about them. And I absolutely think the arts are on the front line of this. I think it's really significant as well when you think of, big protests like Extinction Rebellion. They have, writers rebel. They've got a cultural aspect. They've written books. They've collected books together in order to try, again, as we've almost said before, that you need to appeal to different parts of people's overall beings, not just their heads, but their hearts as well. And the arts, I think, have got an absolutely critical part to play in that.
So what did you, just give us an idea of what you chose from literature? There's no reason why we shouldn't talk about culture as well as painting here. What did you choose as exemplars of what you were trying to,
one of my
policies you were trying to pursue?
Favourite books is a book by Barbara Kingsolver called Flight Behaviour, which is all about climate change, in fact, but it doesn't feel like it's going to be about that. It's about this young woman in the States who is suddenly, it actually brings in lots of the other themes you were talking about in terms of social inequality as well, but it's basically about her awakening to the reality of the climate crisis through a particular happening in her community with all of these butterflies that should have ended up in a different part of the States on their way to Mexico, ending up on her doorstep. There was quite a lot of the poetry now, I think, is in this space too. So there are a whole range of modern texts that are feeding, I think, what is an increasing appetite for understanding more about what's going on around us.
So you've got charge of 5,000 pictures, and you lead on our exhibitions with our director, Joe Hill, the brilliant Joe Hill. What's your plans? How are you going to, you've had the Brink exhibition. How would you say, this is not just a one-off. You've obviously got a commitment to using the art that's here as a way of exploring ideas and answering questions, leading people to things. You don't just say, oh, we'll have boats next year, and the year after that we'll have pictures of buildings. Well, how do you actually conceive?
That's my programming strategy right there.
Yes, yes, you have. How do you actually decide what to have?
We obviously have a responsibility to cover a broad range of issues and looking at sort of a wide range of artists. So, we're very lucky here because we've got the collection and we've also got the top floor exhibition spaces where we program temporary exhibitions. So we can do both. Sort of, we can invite external curators like Caroline to come and explore the collection. So we can do it through that, and then we can invite kind of living contemporary artists to sort of put on a show upstairs on the top floor, and we can do the sort of bigger historic group shows such as the John Nash exhibition that you mentioned. So we might think something like John Nash is historic. It's kind of looking at one of our kind of the sort of the older artists in our collection, but actually, the images depicted by Nash were of our landscape during the interwar period. He'd come out of the First World War. He went into the Second World War as a war artist, and his sort of his response was to go into the landscape and to record. He described it as being his solace, his saviour. So it's just about finding those jumping off points, I suppose, in our exhibition programme for some of these discussions.
But Nash is a stunning artist. I think I hadn't seen. I've been looking at the book of Nash, which we're publishing. We're part publishing, and they're just his landscapes, which are they're strange because they're kind of quite mannered in a funny way. They're not. It's not. This is a tree. He's got a very fine line always and a very clear vision of what he's doing.
Really
they are brilliant. But why did you come across the idea of doing Nash? What gave you the idea of doing Nash?
When we did the Revilius exhibition back in 2017.
Eastbourne's Hero.
Eastbourne's Hero, exactly. That was sort of a group exhibition. So we looked at Revilius and we looked at kind of the group in which he was working, and John Nash was one of the artists he worked really closely with, and we felt right at that time that he had been kind of undervalued, underappreciated, and it was time to. What Towner does really well, I think, is flying the flag for some of the underdog artists, and we take quite a lot of sort of pride in doing that. So he was one of the ones I was really keen to flag up. Our audience were interested in him. We've got one in the collection, so that was good. And we just felt like a lot of institutions, you know, from the Nationals, the Imperial War Museum, are going to be a big lender to this exhibition, that there was a really beautiful collection out there to be found and brought together again.
And 50 years from now, will we have things in our collection which your successor will say, those that work that Tana got in 2020 about ecology, about climate change, it's all it's prophetic, and we're going to have an exhibition. This is how the world looked in 2020. Do you have that stuff?
Yeah, I think we do. I hope we do. And it's certainly, from our collecting policy, it's absolutely, there's something, you know, in my mind. And, you know, maybe there's more moving image now, more film work coming into the collection. The John Nash Vertigo C is our latest acquisition, deals with lots of issues about kind of the environment, ecology, and our histories. So things like that will have a really key moment, I think.
One of the paintings in Brink was Ditchling Beacon, and it was commissioned from Charles Knight as part of a wartime process called Recording Britain. It was something that Kenneth Clark did, and that really struck a chord with me. This idea that when the war was approaching, Kenneth Clark said, let's have this Recording Britain, let's capture this moment, because we're about to move into very dangerous and unknown times. And it really felt like now is the time for something very similar, that maybe Towner could go out and commission some artists to be doing exactly that and recording Britain at this extraordinary moment.
But it wasn't recording Britain, was it, actually? It was propagandising Britain.
Well, there's some truth in that, yes.
Well, I mean, there was one of the paintings I remember was of the Hoover Building on the Great West Road, that one. And they put, this is what we're fighting for. And I think it was Winston Churchill. That's not what I'm fighting for. Bloody Hoover Building.
But it doesn't have to be that, does it?
But it was. And then there was the famous one, I don't know if we've got it here, that is of the South Downs, just near here, going down to Burling Gap, with sheep. Do you remember that one? That was, have you seen that one?
I'm not sure.
It's kind of like, it looks like Millet 100 years on, kind of rolling downs, very formulaic, and little sheep going whatever sheep do at the bottom. That was the Britain. I mean, that's the danger, isn't it? This is what we're fighting for. And maybe it isn't. Maybe it's something completely different. Maybe the landscape is not the way to tell the story. Sarah.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I think it's part of the story, isn't it?
But maybe the story is poverty. Maybe the story is, you know,
poverty, I mean,
housing. Maybe the story is
industrial. David, if we're serious about saying that the next 10 years are going to be critical in terms of whether or not we get off the collision course we're currently on with climate catastrophe, then poverty and inequality and all of those other things that you rightly highlight are going to get 100 times worse. And so it does feel to me right now that when we're talking about the climate crisis, it isn't an environmental issue, it's a civilizational issue. It is the greatest existential threat humankind has ever seen. And that is why the arts are already, and hopefully will still more, engage with that in a passionate way that has not yet been seen, because we're going to have to use every single strategy that we've got to get through this, and arts have got a major role to play.
Jenny, last word from you.
Well, I think Caroline said it, I think, but I would say that it's not for us to persuade artists to do one thing or another. Artists respond to what they see around them, and they also inspire us to think about both our past, our present, and our future. And we're very fortunate in this country to have both brilliant artists and also a huge number of brilliant museums and galleries who are showing those artists and encouraging visitors to come appreciate them and engage with both the beauty and the issues that they raise.
I'm just thinking of the Artemisia exhibition at the National Gallery and women painters, and the position of women painters right through the Renaissance, and women not really being allowed to paint. It's just the danger that somehow one will say everything's fine because we've got these landscapes, and actually a lot is missing. You know,
a lot is missing, and you know, you say Artemisia. What's so interesting is that these things come in and out of fashion. Is it fashion? You know, the way that we view artists and the way that curators select from different artists changes over periods of time, and collecting policies also change over periods of time. So there is both the kind of incisive perception of artists and also a need for curators to think very, very deeply about what is of interest, both now and in the future.
And I just want to say that I did deliberately with Sara, identify quite a few women artists in this collection, precisely so that we could kind of have a fuller range. And so, for example, everyone talks about Eric Ravilius quite understandably. His wife, Terza Garwood, was also an amazing artist, and we made sure we had 2 of her paintings in the exhibition too, so people could perhaps look
Somebody
at that.
was saying to me this morning, that we didn't have any Terza on show in the Ravilius gallery here, which we should have, shouldn't we?
Well, they were in Brink,
But
that's
I
why.
have.
So,
How many Terzas have we got?
We've got 2 paintings,
Just 2.
and then some other of her kind of
Yeah.
printed papers that she made.
I think we have to come to an end there,
Oh.
because our time is up. You've been brilliant. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Just a word about Tana, by the way. We opened early in July when other galleries were waiting to start. And we don't have a queuing system. You can come here and just walk through the door. If we get overcrowded, we say, would you wait a moment? So you don't have to do that dreadful thing of booking in at 2:15. Oh, I don't know whether I can make it at 2:15. I could do it at 2:45. No, there's no room at 2:45. So just come here and enjoy Tana. And I hope you enjoyed our discussion here. Thank you all very much
Thank you.
indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.